Good afternoon, everyone. Good Chodesh. Chodesh Tov. In the story of Korach in this week's parsha, there are incidental stories that teach us great moral lessons as well. In the Torah, when it described the ringleaders, so to speak, the people that organized and pursued the machlokas against Moshe, so it mentioned that one of them was owned by Pelis, the tribe of Reuben. Now, everybody else we know about, so to speak. We know what they did before, we know what they did afterwards, what happened to them. Dosan Vaviram said, Lo Na'aleh, we're not going to go up to talk to Moshe. So Rashi points out, Piv Echshilom. What they said was their downfall. They said, we won't go up, so they went down. And Chazal point out from there, usually children are not involved in the sins of their parents. And even when the Midas Adin Rahman al-Islam is employed against people, but it's not usually an entire family affair. Children are spared. The exception is machlokas. When people deal with a continuing heritage of dispute with others, so then everyone becomes a victim, even children who are, so to speak, innocent, that they weren't involved. And in fact, the worst type of machlokas is one that persists over generations. When 2-3 generations, the families are still fighting with each other, even though the original antagonists are long since gone, and maybe the reason for the machlokas no longer exists. But disputes have a way of perpetuating themselves. It becomes almost a tradition, terrible tradition. I remember in a certain community, I wasn't the rabbi there, but I remember the story that 2 families engaged in a very bitter dispute. Its origins originally may have been in money. Both families were wealthy. And it went generationally so that the grandchildren continued to dispute with each other. The rabbi of the community attempted somehow to dampen it. So he went to see them and told them to stop it already, right? Whatever the cause was, long since gone. And they told him, what are you talking about? That's my Zaydet told me to keep it going. I'm doing what my grandfather told me to do. So there are traditions and traditions. And there are grandfathers and grandfathers. So here, by Dosan Vaviram, everybody is destroyed. By Korach, the Torah itself testifies, the B'nai Korach lo mesu, topic that I discussed with you earlier in the week. notice that I'm just about the only one to read that remembers when I discussed it. So B'nai Korach lo meisu, they didn't die. And as we saw before, B'nai Korach, one of the authors is the healing, and famous family of Levim. So the B'nai Korach are, Korach to a certain extent is rehabilitated, even though he was the main antagonist, even though they all rallied around him, he was the most important person. Korach, then Yitzhak, then Boaz, then Levi. So somehow that got straightened out over time. But what happened with Og ben Peles? Who's he? So it's from the Torah and the Tanakh, we don't know anything. And Chazal Darshan, Chazal used his name not as a given name, so to speak, but as a descriptive name. Then Peles in Hebrew is a scale, a balance scale. There's a famous Hebrew newspaper in Lita called Peles, which was the Orthodox response to the Hebrew newspapers of the Maskilim. Very interesting, just as an aside, that the same Rabbonim wrote for both names. Really, that's how Rav Kook got his literary career. It began because he wrote for Peles. He had Mamorim that Mitziv wrote. It's a very interesting newspaper, and it has validity today more, maybe even more than current newspapers. But anyway, so Peles means that it was balanced, it was a scale. So the Medrash says that Og ben Peles is not necessarily that was his father's name, Peles, but that he was a product of balance, of having the ideas and the problems weighed on the scale of events and of the future. And he was saved. So that's why it says own originally is a negative name, like Onan, that we have earlier in Chumash. But he was saved because he was ben Peles, because he had within himself this quality that somehow he was able to balance the situation and realize that he shouldn't really participate against Moshe. And this brings us to a famous Gemara. Remember, Rabbi Bernstein used to say, this is a famous unknown Gemara. So the Gemara says, what happened with Og ben Peles? The Gemara says he didn't die. Nothing happened to him. So the Gemara wants to know, what do you mean? It's mentioned in the Torah that he was one of the original ringleaders. So the Gemara, this darshan is the pasuk, Chachmas noshim bomsa beisa. The wisdom of women is what always builds the house. Women have an intuition that men do not have. They have a spirituality that men do not have. And therefore, they're able to build a house in the family. It's a trait that the Lord gave to Chava, not to other. So what happened? The Gemara says, the Gemara is almost humorous. It says that he overslept. Okay. That happens. So they went to, his cohorts went to rouse him. They went to wake him up, knocked at the door. This is own said, who's there? So they said, Korach and all the group, and we're going to the Machlekes with Moshe. And he told us to pick him up in the morning. So the Gemara says a remarkable thing. She didn't wake him up. Not only that, she took off her head covering, so her hair was visible. The people who came to pick him up were great tzaddikim. They're holy people. You can't. How can we go in? She's, her hair is uncovered. It's not modest. It's not sleeves. So therefore they left. He slept through the event. He survived it because his wife. And it said that when he sort of wanted to reprimand her later, why didn't you wake me up? She said, "Look, the fool that you are. If Moshe wins, you're nothing. If Korach wins, you're also nothing. So what are you mixing in? No, you have no skin in the game. You're just going to be starving just a machlokas. So where are you going?" So he survived. We don't hear from him again, but he survived. The family survived. And Mrs. Owen Pellis is recorded for us as being Chachmas Noshim on Sabesa. She's the one that built the house. She's the one that saved the situation. You see from here a number of lessons. First lesson is to listen to your wife. As painful as that lesson is. Second lesson is that a person can be so pious that he's not willing to go into a house where the woman doesn't have her head covered properly, and to make a machlokas against Moshe Rabbeinu and bring about the destruction of the Jewish people. And it's the same person, and that he doesn't see it in perspective. And that is a bitter lesson, because that has occurred over and over and over again. That only comes from seeing the little picture and not the big picture. Not realizing what is really about. I remember there was a friend of mine from the yeshiva, and we were both 14 or 15, so it must have been right after the American Civil War. And he was wavering. An opportunity. He thought to go into a business later in life. So he wasn't sure that the business could succeed on Shabbat. He was wavering in many things. We went together to a certain synagogue. The synagogue was in Detroit. And we were standing, we came Shabbos morning and we were davening, And a man walked over to him and said to him, you put your siddur on top of the chumash, and that's wrong. You didn't say Shalom Aleichem. You didn't say, how are you? You didn't say, where are you from? He said, you put the siddur on top of the chumash, and that's wrong. I don't know if that was the deciding issue, but he never really came back to be what he could have been. in Judaism. Now, the man was 100% right. You don't put the siddur on top of the chumash. But in perspective, that's not the thing to say to someone that you never met before in your life. So that's, Chazal said, chochmas noshim. It's a matter of wisdom, perspective, being able to see more than just what's in front of your eyes. And therefore, this story of Umm Peles has great reverberations throughout all the ages of the Jewish people. And it's something that all of us should remember, but we also try to be balanced and correct and pious and good. Rabbi Hanania ben Akash over Ratzak Alivorchu was Achis Israel. Afilu Hiru Lahem Torah Mitzvot Sinem Adonot Chavetz Mantzit Go Yagil Torah Yadir.